Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. I am Elizabeth Corey. I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com, and I am here today to actually talk about money. I want to have a conversation about money with you, which I will also say is quite a loaded subject for a lot of us. And unfortunately, it can come with some very strong belief systems in our system, but also some very opposing belief systems, okay? So it's good that we take a look at what might be happening in our system around money, and particularly the ways in which we may be kind of fighting with ourselves, contradicting ourselves quite a bit around this subject. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that might look like to help you build awareness of what you might be seeing in your system. And, money is tied to a whole lot of beliefs about a lot of things. And not surprisingly, it's also very, very connected to our journey to figure out what we want to do with our lives as far as purpose, career, that sort of thing. So working out the money stuff can also be really important to working out what we're going to spend the rest of our lives doing, which is also obviously very important to us. So even though we may have parts in our system that kind of want to put a bit of a low priority on money, and we're going to talk about that, it actually has a pretty major impact on our lives because it's involved in a lot of the decisions we make, whether we know it or not, about other things, because many times money has such a high priority, and of course it does in our society as well, but it's such a priority in our own systems that it becomes a big player in almost all of the decisions we make. And so I want to focus on it today because if we don't realize how much of an impact it's having on our lives and the decisions we're making, we will just keep letting it have that impact on us in the way that it does. And look, I am not here to say that money is irrelevant in life either. It absolutely is not. Money is, while it's not going to be what matters at the heart of who we are, and it certainly isn't, it is very necessary in our lives in order to establish safety and freedom. A lot of times when we grow up in really abusive households, we can have some pretty challenging, even disastrous belief systems around money. In particular, we can come to see it as something that is basically used to control us in one way or another. And the truth is, on some level in the world we live in today, those who have money do have control. That is true. The problem is that for a lot of us, money is tied to those controlling behaviors, those abusive behavior. And so we can often see money as really, really bad. But in fact, in order to gain freedom from those controlling people, those abusive people that have been in our lives, it does require us to have money of our own in some form, so that we can live without these people. I'll be honest, in a lot of abusive families, there is a strategy to keep us reliant upon them so that they can keep control over us. So when I talk about money, some people may say, hey, we need to put less emphasis on money and more emphasis on healing. But the truth is we can't, because if we're not making the money in order to establish independence and safety and freedom, it's very, very hard for us to heal the way that we need to. And, that was one of the big benefits that I saw in my life, is that I went to college and I got a good job. It wasn't an authentic job. It wasn't something that I was like, oh my God, this is my purpose and I want to spend my life doing that. No, it wasn't that kind of thing. But you know what? It helped me to get to a place where I could establish some financial independence and then step away from the abusive family and start my own life. So there is an element, there is a need for money in our lives, at least based on the society we're living in today. So we need to work with our belief systems around money and start to shift how we see it, because money carries an energy. It carries an energy of the people that are using it and what they're doing with it. And we can change that energy depending on how we are using money. This is something that I really understand to be true But we need to kind of develop, just like we do with people, a particular relationship with money that doesn't feel so abusive, so controlling, so overwhelming to us as a person, so that we can use it to actually help us heal instead of hindering our healing. And but the first thing we have to do is work with those belief systems that have become ingrained in us. That's what I want to spend some time on today, is giving you an understanding of the parts in our system and what they may be feeling about money, so that you can kind of see how your system, your unconscious system especially, may be kind of really fighting with each other, battling it out around the concept of money. And I'm going to start with the most significant part in our system when it comes to the subject of money. I'll be honest, the controller, which is sometimes referred to as ego self, right? So this is the controller. The controller runs the mind. The controller keeps us dissociated. This part of us is absolutely desperate for money. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily hearing them in that way, because, of course, the controller is also desperate for acceptance. So they will not appear to be so money hungry on the surface, and they may not appear to be so money hungry in our mind at first glance. Sometimes it takes us a while to see it, but the controller will make all major decisions based on, first thing, not feeling emotions. So that's not always number one. But number two is making sure we are financially secure. That, for the controller, is their number two priority, right underneath not feeling emotions. Okay. So it's pretty high up on the list for the controller as far as priorities. Priority number two is gotta be money most of the time for the controller, just because of the world we live in. The controller knows that acceptance, power, control, they're all going to be based on whether or not you have money. And normally they develop this belief system because of our childhoods. Because let's face it, in most families, most certainly abusive families, the person with the most money wins, right? They have the power and control. And that does not get past the controller. They see that. They see what's going on there. Like, I see how I get power and control. I got to have that money, right? So the controller is very desperate and very actively pursuing decisions that will make the most money. Now, most of this is coming from a really ungrounded, desperate place, okay? Which means a lot of times the choices they're making might on the surface appear to be decisions that will bring in more money, but they may not. The controller is one of those parts who will fall for the get-rich-quick schemes, right? They have the potential to get scammed. Not always. There are other parts that get scammed as well, but that is there in the controller. And if we're trying to make a decision about which direction we want to take our career or what kind of thing we want to do next, the controller is going to be right there, front and center, to tell you, pick the thing that will be the most financially secure, okay? They'll also have a tendency to speak up when we're thinking about spending money on something. If we're thinking about spending money on something that feels really, really important to us, like more of like kind of a hard choice, right? The controller will always be right there to say, that's a bad decision. We need to save our money, because the controller will want to have money for all the bad things happening that they think are going to happen. And they are often talking to us through their hypervigilance about all the bad things that are going to happen. Right? They will generally put money ahead of authenticity. They will put it ahead of connection with others, right? So if you have something you really want to do that's a very, very authentic, purposeful choice in your life, but the money may seem a little more nebulous as far as how it's going to come in, your controller will never in a million years think that's a good idea, right? So a lot of the resistance we hear to following our heart, things like that's irresponsible, we'll never make enough money, we won't be able to live on that, bad idea, bad idea, bad idea, right? Like that stuff is going to be the controller speaking, okay? Most of the time I've found, and I actually just posted a new blog on this concept just the other day. Most of the decisions we make that are going to support our most authentic self are going to be spoken of by the controller as irresponsible, not good decisions to make. And for the most part, the controller is basing that irresponsibility label on money. Almost always, right? So in order for us to build a positive relationship with money, it does require us to understand who is speaking, right, in our head, telling us we can't make decisions unless they make the most money for us, unless they secured the most financial security, right? We have to understand that's not a grounded adult self. That's not a grounded adult self talking to you. That is your controller. That is a very scared, very risk-averse part there that's telling you not to take any chances and to save as much money as humanly possible. Okay, so remember that. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to get past it and do everything you ever wanted to do. But knowing that it's there, knowing that you can write from that message that the controller is giving you is really important, okay? It helps us to then be able to determine if we might want to try something a little bit different. Okay, I want to say hi to Aaron and Jan. So glad you guys are here today. So here's the thing about the controller's desperation. When they are desperate, it's usually because there are parts that disagree with them. And this is something we can usually state. When it comes to that desperate feeling we sometimes get about things, desperation or needing to do something right this very minute is usually a sign that one part wants this thing, but other parts don't. So the desperation is almost like if I hurry and get this done, then the other parts won't have time to sabotage it or block me, right? So that's often what desperation means. Desperation does not mean that it's the best idea we've ever had. Generally speaking, the best idea we ever had is going to be patient, and it's not going anywhere. So, but what I find is that maybe not so great ideas that are led oftentimes by a part who has a whole lot of other parts in the system and don't agree. That's going to be where you're going to see your desperation, and that's going to be a place that you generally want to avoid. So remember that when you hear desperation, when you hear like a intense sense of urgency, it often means there are parts in your system that disagree with that idea. And so that often happens with money. And we're going to talk about the parts that disagree. Now, it doesn't mean the parts that disagree are right, but it can mean that. And so we want to get an idea of what the other kind of voices, parts, belief systems, messages in our system are, because that will then help us to understand what our controller is up to, because generally speaking, they're up to something a little bit. So the next part I want to talk about is a part I call the karma kid. The karma kid is absolutely, pretty much without any contest, the biggest saboteur when it comes to money, okay? So what I like to tell people is if you want to have a different experience with money, if you want to have a slightly calmer controller, because a lot of their reactions are coming from their fear of the sabotage, and you want to have a sense that you do, in fact, deserve to make money and to be financially independent, you will need to write from your karma kid. You will need to work with this part because most of the beliefs the karma kid has around money are about our lack of worthiness to have it. So we really need to make sure that we are on that message. If you hear a message in your system, or honestly, maybe even if you don't hear it yet, if you just sense that there might be this message in your system, maybe because of things that have happened externally in your life that seem to be holding you back from having the income you think that you should have. You might have this message that's telling you, I am not worthy of making money, or at least not making enough of it to be comfortable, right? Some karma kids will just let you kind of get by, paycheck to paycheck, barely making it, always struggling, always worrying, right? Okay, maybe that's acceptable to your karma kid. What's not acceptable is being comfortable. And I would say this is true for a whole lot of people. One of the big societally based messages that we've been hearing, honestly, probably since there became such a thing as money, is the message that some people are worthy of having a fair amount of money and other people are not. Almost like there's a difference between them and us, like somehow, back in the day, right? Back in like pre-Middle Ages kind of, there was this belief that people who rose up in a society or were labeled dukes or lords or whatever, right, were actually better human beings, right? So that message has never really left, although it's evolved, right? It's evolved. This gets stuck with the karma kid, right? Then, of course, we also have it on an abusive family level where it's like the person with the money has the money because they're special and they're better and you're never going to be as good as them. Again, as I mentioned earlier, many abusive families do want to create a dependence because if a child remains dependent to that family of origin, they then cannot sort of step out of the abusive patterns that are happening and, establish independence and start to speak their story, tell their story, talk about what's actually been happening to them. Those can't happen if you still need money from them, right? So this is a big message the karma kid holds on to. You're not allowed to be independent. You're not good enough to be independent. You're not worthy of having a comfortable income. You're not worthy of having money. That's only for special people. That's only for important people, right? These are some of the messages that we may be seeing from the karma kid around this topic. Now, I'm going to take it a step further and give you a specific example of something many karma kids are holding on to, especially if you have grown up with trauma around trafficking. This is a different angle. It obviously involves money in some pretty horrible and disgusting ways. But a lot of times we can hold some really yucky beliefs around trafficking, for example, where we may believe there's only one way we are allowed to make money. I will say that in my upbringing, it was loud and clear that there was only one way to monetize myself, and it would be in that particular form. Obviously, I've worked with those belief systems, but they were there and they were repeated constantly when I was a child. So even being able to choose a career and make money at it can be a big challenge for us when we have this belief system in the karma kid. So we need to be paying attention to what does the karma kid think we are allowed to do to make money? What does the karma kid think about how much money we're allowed to have? Are we allowed to have comfort? Are we allowed to have independence? These are all big messages with the karma kid that we need to write from, even though yes, it doesn't feel good to acknowledge this stuff is in there, but leaving it in there means that we really will never find that level of financial independence that we deserve. Like flat out, we deserve it, right? So that's the karma kid. Not fun, right? But also can make some of the biggest difference in our ability to make an income and be independent, honestly, of any part that we could work with. That's the big one. So the next parts I want to talk about for a few minutes here are the freedom fighters. Now, I'll be honest, it's hard to reach our freedom fighters. It's especially hard to reach freedom fighters when we have very strong karma kids and controllers, and most of us do, because freedom fighters are much more interested in, not surprisingly, our freedom, but they want that to come to us through our authenticity. So they're very interested in our authenticity, our freedom, and they want to do this, of course, in the best ways possible. But when they're a bit ungrounded, and they can be, they often have some kind of warped views about the best way to get there, because all in all, the freedom fighters, most of all, especially when ungrounded, are going to defy control. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with defying control, but sometimes they will defy it to our detriment. This is where it becomes problematic. So for these parts, money can, in fact, be a mechanism for control, right? So many freedom fighters will have a disdain for money. right? Like, because of the way they watched mean people attain money and what they did with that money, right? The abusive things they did with that money, they have decided that money is bad and they don't want anything to do with it, which, okay, I can understand how they got there. The problem is, again, we need to come back to this idea that money does need to be a part of our real freedom. Freedom from money, while that sounds good in theory, does need to come with the acquisition of some money, because we need, like, to have real freedom in this world that we live in today. We do need to have money. What the freedom fighters don't understand is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that money matches the energy that's behind it. So what we need to help our freedom fighters to understand is that it isn't about not having money. It's about the energy that we're going to put behind that money, how we're going to use it, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to benefit ourselves and establish more independence for ourselves. This is all really, really important stuff to help the freedom fighters understand. But first, we may need to write from the idea that money is evil, right? That money itself is evil, as opposed to the people who used it being evil, which we can completely understand, right? So if we are in the process of fighting to be free from money, we may be stopping ourselves from real freedom. And this is a problem with ungrounded freedom fighters in general. They're often fighting to be free, but the ways they go about it are actually not serving us in establishing that freedom we want. So really watching for that kind of language in our freedom fighters, watching for what they're saying under their, like, I've got freedom fighters who want to go and live on a beach and in a tent and braid hair for a living, but not for money, just for something. I don't know what they want, but they definitely don't want to be focused on money, which part of the reason they do that too is because the controller is, of course, in there totally obsessed with money, and they hate the controller. Because guess what? The controller is our own inner representation of control, right? So they're always fighting against that controller, and the controller is always attempting to suppress them. And by the way, this behavior is what creates anxiety in our system. And it just sucks the life out of us. Honestly, it's just such an energy drain. So these are the concepts I really wanted to bring to you. I will also say that, yes, we have inner children in there too. And inner children might respond to money in exactly the way you think. They don't really care about it as long as they can get the things they want. And by that, I mean the stuff maybe they never got to have or never got to experience when they were children, right? So obviously our inner children are not going to take into account money when they are considering what they want. And it takes that adult self to come in for all of these parts and say, okay, we're going to bring this into balance a little bit. And there may be things we can do. There may be things we can't. But we're also not going to make all of our decisions based on how much money we're going to have because of it, or how much money we aren't going to have because of it. So this is really what we need to focus on when it comes to money. I'll tell you, this is a tough topic, and it is so ingrained in almost all of our trauma memories in some way. So working with this takes time, but we can take steps towards better financial freedom as we continue to heal. So that's what I wanted to bring for you today. Thank you so much for being here with me. I hope you found this topic interesting and helpful. Please feel free to ask me any questions in the comments, even once this ends. I don't think I've had a lot of questions during the live stream, but feel free to add them in. And I really do appreciate you all being here with me today and watching. And take care of yourselves. See you next Tuesday at noon for another discussion about trauma and its impact on us. Thank you all so much. Bye.